Welcome to Public Safety Talk Radio, a podcast for all of our heroes in public safety, including law enforcement professionals, firefighters, EMTs, corrections officers, healthcare workers, and more. This show is produced by the POCUA and is founded upon its Soundness Initiative.
This episode is sponsored by Police Mortgage. Police Mortgage is a full-service mortgage company dedicated to serving police officers and first responders. Founded in 2008, Police Mortgage offers a variety of mortgage products tailored to meet the needs of those who serve and protect. Police Mortgage, for first responders who are second to none.
I am Ken Bader, your host for Public Safety Talk Radio, and I have an extra episode. We were going to wrap up Season 7, but then all of a sudden I had a request to interview a great guest, and I said, you know what? It's my darn podcast, and if I want to extend the season, I can sure as heck do that. So we have Susan Lewis-Simmons, who has a lot of great initials on the back of her name that I won't even get into. I think MCS, PhD. But the most important thing is she's worked with NYPD, she's worked with a lot of first responders, a lot of our great military, and today she is the president and founder of Under the Shield, a nonprofit business providing stress coaching and other services to emergency service personnel, military personnel, and their families around the world. Susan, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ken. It's an honor to be here. We appreciate you extending your season to have us on. No pressure here. No pressure at all.
My pleasure. You know, as I said in the email, you know, you're the exact guest that we'd like to have on Public Safety Talk Radio. So there's no reason for us to push this out longer than it needs to, especially if any of our words help one person, you know, whether it's a first responder or anybody else, then it was all the worth of having this particular episode. But, you know, I did a little bit of research on your organization. You talk a lot about stress coaching.
Yes.
And you tell us exactly what stress coaching is and specifically how that helps first responders.
Okay. And let me say this about all those initials behind my name. It just shows anybody look good on paper because it really doesn't mean much anything, as I found out the hard way. I wound up as having been married to law enforcement for 20 years that I wanted to go back and get my master's in counseling, got through that program and realized that licensure and mandated reporting really was not something conducive for especially law enforcement to want to come in and talk to somebody. Right. So that's how it all kind of came about 32 years ago for it to be stress coaching. And we trademarked it specific to first responders, military, and families. And we do it anonymously as stress coaches. People in the mental health world will talk about confidentiality as 100% confidential. But in reality, confidentiality is a legal term. And there's always 3 exceptions. I was a litigation paralegal prior to starting this. And it's sad to me that law enforcement doesn't always understand it. They hear 100% confidential. They think they won't report anything, but that's not true. So we figure it's safer if we don't have notes and records and we say it's anonymous. You can be Bugs Bunny, Daffy Duck. You can be my ex-husband. I don't care. That actually happened once, and I thought that was quite amusing because that probably wasn't in that person's best interest necessarily. and so
don't make me spit water all over my computer. All right, that was funny.
Well, and the thing about coaching is we get in the game with people. We're not sitting in an ivory tower with book knowledge. We're down in the game and we're calling plays. My son was a goalie in ice hockey from 6 to college. His coach didn't sit somewhere outside the arena. He was on the ice with him. And so we call this play. If that doesn't work, we've got 100 other plays that we can call. Mm-hmm. And so it just makes it a lot more relatable. And our stress coaches, to be one with us, you have to have done it, been married to it, raised by it, or given birth to it. It's a lifestyle. And the interesting part that it kind of makes mental health mad is to be a sports psychologist, you cannot just get a PhD. You have to study kinesiology and all those other things. Well, if our athletes need specialization, don't our tactical athletes? And that's where we come in as stress coaches. I did a full SWAT school when I started this company 32 years ago, geared up, running, gunning, climbing, shooting. Actually outshot some of those guys. I did hostage negotiation training. I've done narcotics. I've done everything and ride-alongs all over the country because I wanted to entrench myself into this culture, not just be married to it.
Right.
Because you have to understand the culture. Look, y'all are crazy. Cops, especially, firefighters too, are crazy, but you're not mentally ill. There is a difference. So that's where our stress coaches come from.
Yeah, I like everything that you said. A couple of things that really stand out at me or to me is, as I mentioned on this show many times before, my wife is in healthcare, and we talk about confidentiality. We'll watch one of those crime things, or we'll watch the news and whatever. It's like, well, you can't talk about that. You can't HIPAA law and everything. But then there are those situations where, all right, if you're going to harm yourself or somebody else, then confidentiality goes out the window. There's a certain responsibility on behalf of the professional. So, it's not the first time that I heard. I've never been a police officer. I've worked with several of them over the last 20 years. It's not the first time I've heard, well, I think I got a problem, but I'm not going to tell anybody because I'm not going to have them take my gun and badge away. I'm not going to have my partner think that I'm nuts.
Exactly.
He or she has to know that I have their back. And if there's any question on that, then we both have a problem. So, I love the confidentiality from the standpoint that, sometimes, people just need to have one conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that's all they need, or maybe they need to have that initial conversation to kind of work through those next steps. Maybe that next step is, all right, you know what, we're happy to talk to you, but your next step maybe is, you know what, maybe you really shouldn't be on this for a little while. Do you talk through some of those things? Or
Well, here's how we approach it. We
Sure.
believe the brain controls the body, but how the body feels impacts what the brain thinks. My son laughs and says this, who knew the Snickers commercial would endorse his mother's philosophy? But the reality is for 32 years, I have dealt with a lot of officers, suicidal and fire. And there's one common denominator in 99% of them, and it's sleep deprivation. It is not mental illness. And I can give you an example. I'm sitting here in our podcast studio. It's the Chris Ferrara podcast studio. Chris was a Chandler, Arizona police officer. And when I met him in 2012, when I moved out here, he was a sergeant, was suicidal. Well, and we hear this a lot. Chris went to an overpass on the 202 and was going to jump in front of an 18-wheeler. Well, the reason he didn't do it is because he worried about the 18-wheeler driver. If he truly were mentally ill, he wouldn't have cared about it. And we hear this a lot. And so when we can get them sleeping, and we can usually turn it around in 48 hours for the most part, then things tend to change. And here's the scary part that mental health really doesn't understand, and I wish they did. They're good people meaning well. But here's the thing. There's no better psychologist than a police officer, because psychology is the study of human behavior. Every cop on every stop, even off duty, sitting in restaurants, they're assessing human behavior around them. So again, watching them with a psychologist can be quite funny. It's like a cat with a mouse, kind of batting them around. But they have to have the freedom to be able to walk in and say, I'm thinking about killing myself. I had an officer sitting in my driveway in my home where my office used to be in Gilbert, and for about 10, 15 minutes, and I'm thinking, you're wasting my time. Come on in. And he finally walks in, and I go, why are you wasting my time? He said, well, I was sitting out there with my gun in my mouth. And I said, well, you obviously chose not to pull the trigger. He goes, no, I knew it'd piss you off if I did it in your driveway. Good call. And he sat down, and for 4 hours, we did what we call emptying the psychological garbage can, which is a theory that I wrote 32 years ago, the Simmons theory of the psychological garbage can, that explains post-traumatic stress as an injury, not a disorder, meaning permanent. And literally they leave the office after, and I'm not going to let them leave in that state of mind. I never have, never will. If they have to sit there 6 hours with me, sometimes they're going, hey, I promise not to kill myself. You'll let me leave. What I'm trying to say here. But when we can explain it to them, then because they'll be going, man, I thought I was losing my mind. And when I'll give you a prime example. When I started this company 32 years ago, I had a senior Montgomery police officer who told me, he said, Susan, love you to death, but I don't need you. I've dealt with human pain and suffering, all of these horrible things. He goes, I'm sure there's some new academy rookie that's going to be in touch with his feminine side. He's going to need to talk to somebody about all this. About 5 years into it, I get a call, and it's this officer screaming, crying, wailing, gnashing teeth. I'm like, what in the world? He goes, I'm a sick son of a bitch. And I said, okay, what's happened? He said, I told you, I don't get upset about human pain and suffering. He said, but I have just seen a stray dog get run over, and I'm devastated. And I told him, I said, you know what? I said, sit on the curb. Because he said he was in uniform downtown Montgomery, middle of a business day, outside his marked unit, crying his eyes out. And I said, those tears you're shedding are for all those years of the dead babies, mutilated bodies. The dog wouldn't fit in the garbage can. I said, come to the office. He spent 4 hours on my couch. He called it verbally vomiting, but he's emptying his garbage can. And he would tell you today, he has others, he made it to retirement. He truly believes he would have killed himself that day had he not had me to call, because he went into this. Police and fire and those go into this military because they're caregivers.
Right.
He thought he had lost all ability to have compassion for human beings and cared more about a stray dog. So in his brain, he was mentally ill. That wasn't it at all. He just needed somebody to listen that understood, didn't think the sick humor was bad, because we found studies that when they can use sick humor, the body sends a message to the brain, this has no power over me. And children is what typically filled up most first responders' garbage cans. Now we have body cam. That has changed the whole dynamic also. But it's about someone not judging them and thinking that they're mentally ill and can't have a gun. And mental health will say, I can't believe you let them leave with a gun. And I go, what do you want me to do? Run a U-Haul, go to their house, empty their 10 safes.
Right.
And they can't go buy another one. They can't borrow their buddies. They can't drive into the piling of an interstate.
Right.
Jump off of, it isn't about that. It's not the same as suicide in the general population. It's good people who've been exposed to way too much stuff that no one should have to be, but this is their job. And we haven't taught them about that. We've trained them to be problem solvers, but we forgot to teach them they're not going to solve everybody's problem, and mostly forgot to teach them how to solve their own. And this is where the garbage can concept comes in. And I have people who are chiefs and sheriffs now that go, Susan, you taught that to me 32 years ago, and I share it with everybody that comes to work for me because it just makes sense.
Yeah, I heard a similar concept. It was a little bit nicer than the garbage can, but it was a psychological concept as it pertained to marriage and so forth. I have an ex-wife, and we went to counseling. It worked so well that we're both married to other people and don't talk to each other anymore. But
I hear you. I hear that.
Yeah. But one of the concepts which I really gravitated to was your cup is. And, sometimes your cup is so full, and then, your spouse is trying to talk to you about a serious issue. And it's like, it's basically like having a full hot cup of coffee and then pouring more hot coffee on top of it, all over your hand. That's not going to be a positive reaction.
Are you looking for a podcast to answer some financial questions? Well, then check out the Mortgage Beat podcast, brought to you by Police Mortgage, for first responders who are second to none. Mortgage Beat gives insight into the home loan process specifically for police officers, firefighters, and other public safety professionals. The podcast is hosted by Police Mortgage CEO John Aritos, who has decades of experience in the mortgage industry. Check out Mortgage Beat on Spotify today.
But I want to go back to the sleep deprivation.
Yeah.
Because that is, I've talked to a lot of experts like yourself that are doing great things for first responders. You're the first person to bring up sleep deprivation as one of the main issues, for lack of a better way of putting it. Is sleep deprivation a symptom of a bigger problem, such as PTSI, or is sleep deprivation the problem itself, or it depends on the person?
Well, I think there are different reasons people are sleep deprived,
Yeah.
and it can start early on in life. And it isn't about one of the things we teach is it's not about the quantity of sleep, it's about your quality of sleep. It drives me crazy to have these people talk about you need 7.5 hours. Well, not me. I was a 5 hour sleeper and got exactly what I needed in those 5 hours. And so there's a huge misconception, but they're all having to work so much and so much overtime, whether it's to cover expenses
Right.
or to cover teams because they're short staffed everywhere or whatever. And then we expect them literally to walk in and drop in the bed and go to sleep after the adrenaline rushes and all of those things. And that's one of the things we talk to them about is if they have an adrenaline rush late in their shift, if they don't use it, then that can impact their sleep quality. And so when you can start giving them reasons, and it's funny because I always ask spouses, does your law enforcement spouse kind of twitch in their sleep? And almost 100%, you'll see them nodding. And the law enforcement spouse has no idea. Well, they're not getting down into REM and delta sleep like they should. So they may sleep 12 hours and wake
Right.
up exhausted. Well, we use natural things that the body needs, the brain needs in order to accomplish this. And again, it takes a long time to get caught up,
Right.
but you can start feeling better very quickly once you do start to have good quality sleep. So when you're sleep deprived, the world is bad, even though you can't necessarily pin down something. I had an officer one time come in, and it was very clear, it was very evident by his walk and his appearance that he was in that dark place. And I said, all right, tell me about your job. He goes, Susan, I'm in my ideal job. I'm exactly where I want to be doing what I want to do in a specialty team. Okay. How are things at home? Wife and I have never been closer. And he said, how can I be in this dark place? I said, when's the last time you slept good? He goes, you were married to DEA. He goes, you're familiar with wiretaps. And I said, I sure am. I said, give me 48 hours. And I practiced what I preach. I gave him the natural products that we talk about. And 3 days later, he called me and he said, I didn't know life could be this good.
So much to unpack there, especially because I'm one of those guys that does need the 8 hours, or at least 7 hours. If I get 4 or 5, it just isn't going to work for me. Same thing when it starts getting into 10. Back hurts. I'm in a fog and all that other crap. So 7, I found that 7 to 8 works for me. But to your point. Yeah, I remember, in the last 3 or 4 years that I was still drinking before I stopped, figured out that I had a problem. I would sleep for hours and hours and hours, but I was always exhausted because of the way, that alcohol messed with my sleep pattern.
Yeah, it's a sedative. It's artificial.
Yeah, and I'm not a doctor, but I truly, and I also don't believe in any cosmic thing in dreams. But I do believe that the mind is very complex, and those 7, 8 hours, or even 5 hours for some people, is there for your mind to work through certain things.
Yes.
And if you're not getting the proper sleep, your mind doesn't have that function. Is to use a very technical, high level PhD term, you're screwed up now.
That's exactly right. And here's the other thing that we are big on too is about vitamins and minerals. Because when the body is not balanced, it's the example I use is it's like the older cars that used to need high octane gas, but we couldn't afford it. And so we put regular in. Well, the car would get you point A to B, but it might hesitate, sputter, make some noises and stuff. Well, that's what's happening to a lot of our first responders. physiologically because they either don't have time to eat or they're not eating anything but processed junk, because it's just not healthy places open when you work midnights.
Yep.
You know, here in Arizona, it's going to end in Berto's or something, you know, and it's just not going to be good quality stuff. So they're dumping this stuff in, and then a lot of people don't understand that 90% of your serotonin, your happy drug, comes from your gut. So when your gut's unhealthy, you can't possibly be in a good mood or have your serotonin balanced like it should be. And so this is what we also do. We get them started on good quality vitamins. We start with 3 or 4 rather than the whole kitchen sink at them. And then if we need to add to it, we can. But it's amazing to see the energy levels, to see irritability. Families tell us irritability drops in 2 or 3 days. They start sleeping better. Everything just comes together. And it's easy versus pharmaceuticals, because they can always go to that. But we start on the natural side first, and they're very receptive to that.
So is it just a matter of going to CVS and getting a bottle of Flintstones multivitamin?
Sorry, no.
I like the Barney myself. Yeah.
That doesn't surprise me. But no, all vitamins are not created equal. We research the vitamin companies. Most everything we recommend, they can order on Amazon. But sadly, the pharmaceutical companies are beginning to buy some of the more advertised vitamins, and they're putting crap in them because they know when people are balanced with vitamins and minerals, they don't need their pharmaceuticals. I would go to prison if I tried something like that, but they can do that. So we're constantly researching, and we're big on things being like soft gels, powders, liquids, sublinguals, vegetable capsules, things that the body can actually digest. And one of our big ones that we push, and one of them that I pushed to the NYPD post 9/11, was a healthy B complex. What a lot of people don't understand about the B12 in some of the B complexes and multivitamins is it's made from cyanocobalamin, which converts to cyanide in the system.
It converts to cyanide. Be it an ass, I interrupted you. You said it turns into cyanide.
Cyanide, absolutely. And you don't have a cyanide receptor. And the vitamin Bs need each other to metabolize. So it's going to kick those out of your system, basically. The one we recommend has a methylcobalamin B12, which is a more natural. Body can absorb it. It also helps in the natural production of melatonin. And the symptoms of vitamin B deficiency are mild depression, loss of energy, irritability, sleep pattern changes, eating pattern changes, and inability to concentrate. And I'll ask that to a class, and their hands are going up. They got all of them. Well, that can turn around because it's a water soluble. We can get it in their system pretty quickly, and that can turn those things around.
Yeah. So I actually take B12 as one of my vitamins. So I got to go look and see if I'm taking something decent or if it's all screwed up, like you just said.
Well, and here's how you'll know, because here's how screwed up the country is. The FDA requires the healthy one to be on the label. And this is where I tell people, this is when meth is good, because you'll never remember methylcobalamin. So when you look at a label, it says B12. If it doesn't say meth behind it, you're getting the cyanocobalamin, which is the one that converts to cyanide.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I'm learning stuff here.
That's the way this works. And you need to be taking a good B complex along with that B12 for it to really metabolize in your system. Because there's 8 or 9, depending on who you talk to, vitamin Bs, and they need each other in order to metabolize and fully benefit what you're using it for.
Interesting. Well, before I turn this into a vitamin show and go, and I haven't taken mine yet today, before I come in here and I show you everything that I'm taking so you can go through each one of them.
Absolutely.
Maybe that'll be show number 2. I do want to get back to the stress.
Yes.
Because we kind of got on the sleep deprivation, which is important. We don't talk much about that on this show, and I'm glad that we covered a bunch of that. But
well, and you can die from sleep deprivation.
Oh, sure.
And stress will cause that.
Yep.
And that's why we kind of tie it all in together. And, the coffee cup example is one, but here's why I came up with the garbage can theory. And here's what it looks like. And this is why families need to be a part of our training that explains it, because they're the first line of defense. They see the early warning signs.
Correct.
And here's how we explain it. All first responders, military, they have what they do is a lifestyle. So they have one psychological garbage can. It could have started filling up as a child or in high school, whatever. But here's what we tell them to look for. If you compare your psychological garbage can to the garbage at home, first thing you notice about your garbage at home, if you don't empty it, is it smells bad. Psychological garbage can, your attitude sucks, you're irritable, you're cynical, you're snapping at your families. Families are saying things like, you're not as much fun as you used to be. We call that post-traumatic stress. Garbage can is full. If you go to empty your garbage at home, it's been sitting there, it's decayed, it's mildewed, the bag is decayed, you pick it up, bottom falls out, and you have a huge mess. Psychological garbage can, we start to see anxiety, depression, sleep deprivation, high blood pressure, heartburn turns to acid reflux, and addictions. That's post-traumatic stress injury. And we tell them you can stay in that injured state till you're suicidal, you're divorced 5 times, you get DUIs, get fired, retire, whatever, or you can do what we call post-traumatic stress growth by growing through their injury. In other words, helping others because you're finding purpose in your own pain. And that's kind of our thing. All of our stress coaches have been on the couch. And now they're working through it by sharing their stories to help others. And there's healing there. So that's for all first responders, dispatchers, detention, everybody, because that stuff gets in there and they don't even know, they're not even aware of it until here's when they come to us. They got a lot of time on, all of a sudden they can't control their emotions. And they become very anxious about, because they'll be watching a comedy show and start crying in front of their families. And then they're like, what if I start crying in front of my sergeant or lieutenant or in front of my troops, and they can't control it? Well, that's a huge part of that garbage can. It's done. And they think something's really wrong with them. They come in and say that, and I go, yeah, you're the 5th one this week. Let's talk about the garbage can and how to empty it.
Interesting. I'm really glad that you mentioned a few different first responder roles, the firefighter, police, dispatcher, and so forth. Do you see any differences in the different professions of different types of stress? Like, for instance, the police officer might, have to shoot somebody in self-defense. A firefighter may have to bring somebody out of a burning building with their flesh literally falling off. A 911 operator, maybe listening to somebody getting stabbed and screaming. All stress, but is some of that different in one way, shape, or form?
It is very different between them. It can still have the same results. But here's the interesting thing we have found, especially on the law enforcement side. An officer involved in a shooting, typically the shooting is not the issue. They are taught how to, when to, where to, why to. The issue has come in a lot of the things that we have done critical incident debriefings on over the years, is that an innocent person may have gotten hurt or killed prior to them getting there, and they're not aware of that because everybody wants to hone in on you shot and killed somebody. And I'm like, didn't they teach you that's part of your job? Because we teach that. But in the academies, although we're fixing to change this, they're not teaching about the innocent people, that it's not your job. You can't be everywhere all the time. And that's the stuff they harbor. And when you point it out to them, all of a sudden the tears will start to flow and they'll go, nobody ever said that to me, Susan. And I'll go, look, of course, you did your job. It isn't that you're celebrating that you shot and killed somebody. They made a bad decision. They could have changed their mind at any point. You did your job. But then the child that was there that saw it, or the kid that you're having to take from mom and dad because they are cooking meth or whatever they're doing, they're traumatized and you feel bad for them, but you got to do your job. Dispatch, what we find with them is so many times they don't ever know the outcome of the call. They're the one initiating, get somebody there. Fire, one of the biggest advantages, it's not as much as it used to be, but for fire is they work the call and they go back to the fire station as a team. Troopers out here can have to see the worst wreck in the world and they drive off on a lonely highway by themselves. Some don't even go to briefing. So there's not this camaraderie coming back. They sign on in their vehicle, sign off in their vehicle.
Yeah.
But fire at least comes back to the firehouse and they know each other that way. But law enforcement could have county, city, state, fed all in one event, and fire. Fire also gets the opportunity to save people a lot of times, where usually when PD gets there, it's done. And so that's a hard part of it. It's not to say that fire doesn't have garbage cans that fill up 100%.
Sure.
But the interesting part is with all of them, sometimes the garbage can is filled up by lack of leadership and really bad supervisors.
Yeah.
Because what we're hearing now is, especially on the law enforcement side, they're afraid they're going to go to jail for doing their job because upper management, I don't call them leaders, upper management will throw them under a bus.
Yeah.
And it's sad. The public has no idea.
Yep.
And this is the kind of stuff that we try to help them with, is that ability to, first of all, verbalize it, get it out of the garbage can, talk about whoever, and talk about whatever they'd like to do to them, because we're not going to judge them in these things. We understand it. And that's where stress really, and this is the hard part too, is when we teach a class, and I'm about to go to San Diego in 2 weeks to train Border Patrol. That's one of our regulars. And one of the first things that I do is I put up I ask them, is stress good, bad, positive, or negative? They eventually go, all the above. Sure is. Well, then I read the definitions of stress, and most of them are negative. They're really talking more about stress reaction. And the way we define it is stress is change, good or bad. The body responds to change, lighting, temperatures, whatever. Stressors are the activating event that bring about the change: marriage, divorce, promotion, kid go to the Marine Corps, in my case. That's hard. Had to go to Paris Island in the summer, but that's okay. And then he deployed. Mama really wanted to go with him. But then we talk about stress reaction, and we teach a supervisor's class because everybody's reaction to the stressor can be different, and it's based on your perception. And so this is where the second line of defense are supervisors. And they need to be aware of early warning signs to hit what we call episodic stress, where they get people help before it hits chronic, where they have to discipline or terminate, and nobody can afford to discipline or terminate anybody right now. And we're talking about 18-year officers I've seen in departments around here, that departments, because of lack of leadership at the top, they're literally firing these people over things that are not fireable offenses.
Yeah, inconsequential.
Yes. And you go, how much money have you tied up in these people? And experience. And they've had no other internal affairs investigations, but they said something to make you mad and they get rid of it right before 2 years to retirement. It's that stuff a lot of times is what is in their garbage can, even more so than all the other things, but they have to be made aware of it.
Yeah. Yeah, this is a little off the cuff, but one of the things that, I did a little bit of research on a couple years after COVID in, all of this unfortunate George Floyd and anti-police sentiment out there, is the concept of empathy fatigue. That, you eventually, to kind of use your garbage can analogy, that you're so full that you lose the capacity to even care. And I can't even imagine the psychological effect that has on an individual. Have you seen more of that?
Well, that's interesting, because that's an earlier precursor to the garbage can. And then when they do become emotional, then they really freak out, because they've gone from this kind of stone cold, nothing bothers me, to now I'm crying over watching a comedian
Yeah.
or listening to something on the radio that's not even.
Well, maybe it was just a really bad comedian and you're pissed that you're wasting the time. I mean,
That's
yeah.
that's always a possibility. But it's almost the stages that we see of the garbage
Yeah.
can. But again, the rewarding part for me is always when I can explain these things to somebody who's already scared to death to be in there, because until they figure out Susan's buttons ain't getting pushed, and I'm not talking to anybody or telling anybody anything, and then I can start to explain it. And the scary thing for a lot of them is she knows way too much to have never been a cop. Well, I'm not a cop because I just shoot people. Cops in Alabama will say Susan doesn't carry for protection. She's afraid she'll miss a chance to shoot somebody. There's probably some truth in that, especially at my age. But the reality is that's what they need, is somebody not sitting back. How does that make you feel? That is of zero value. Yeah. And then we can give them tools of ways to handle and empty the garbage can. They don't even have to be in our office. And they'll think I'm crazy when I tell them some of these things, but then when they do it, they go, I can't believe how much that helped.
Yeah.
And so, we're giving them practical things. And again, our sessions, most mental health will run 50 minutes. And I understand that because of insurance and stuff. But I've had sessions run 18 hours. I'm too old now. It won't happen now because I'll be sleeping. On average, first appointments with our stress coaches, 4 to 6 hours.
Wow.
Because once you get them going, why would I shut them down?
Right.
That's frustrating to them to go, oh, suck those tears up. Our session is over. We'll get into it next week. They may not come back next week.
Right.
And that's why our attitude is get them in, get them fixed, get them out, because we got 5 more wanting to come in behind them. And then we include the spouses.
Yeah.
Because they're affected by this. And they're, in my situation, I could be Marshall's biggest stressor or stress reliever. But I needed to know my role, and I needed to know what to look for and the ways that I could help, or where I could get him for help that wasn't going to jeopardize his job.
Yeah.
And it's frustrating to us to hear mental health and even leadership or managers and departments say the culture has to change. The culture is not going to change as long as the licensed world is a mandated reporter. And we're not eliminating the licensed world. There are times you have to use them for workman's comp, industrial, medical retirements. What we're big on is a 3-tiered approach: peer support, stress coaching in the middle, and the licensed world on the end. Yeah. Because when we build the rapport, then they'll go to the licensed people we recommend that we have vetted that do the next part of it if that's necessary, which is not most of the time. Most of the time we can deal with it.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. And I like the approach of at some point bringing the spouse in. Yeah, I think that, whether it's been first responders or, even, a good friend of mine does an addiction podcast called Family Sobriety Now that, he talks a lot about the fact that, while you may be well-meaning, you may be part of the problem. Or you may be part of the problem even though you're trying so hard. You need to know some of these things and some of these triggers.
There's nothing we don't deal with. We help put marriages back together. And in my own case, mine had to go for treatment, for alcohol treatment. Yeah. Well, he got 30 days, and I always wondered, when do I get my 30 days?
Yeah.
Because I was there with young children, and I was impacted by the 9 years of it. But I never seemed to get mine. Yeah. And that's something that they need, and they need that understanding. We even have a stress coach here who was the son of a Chandler police officer. He's in the process of getting his master's in counseling. His father died of COVID. He was the first line of duty death, COVID, in January of 21. And he does stress coaching for our adolescents and kids of first responders because he lived it.
Yep.
He can relate, and he knows how to communicate with them, and he's an invaluable resource. And so we deal with the kids too. We have parents that call us. We have siblings that call. We don't turn anybody away because it is a lifestyle. And it's time that we start to recognize that.
Yeah. Well, Susan, I could talk to you for 18 hours.
Me too.
Yeah, and be a lot smarter for it, but I can't
Well, I'm
work
not
on 4
promising
hours.
that. Now, wait a
Yeah,
minute. Now, let's get this straight.
I want
Hang
to
on a
guarantee.
minute.
I want to guarantee. Damn it. But I want my 7 or 8 hours. So we'll kind of wrap this up with this. Other than the obvious answer, which is talk to somebody under the shield and under the if there's a first responder out there that's struggling with mental wellness, that hears some of this about the sleep deprivation, about the irritability, about the garbage can, and some clicks, that sounds more familiar than I would like it to be. Other than to call Under the Shield, which I would recommend, or somebody, what's one piece of advice you might be able to give them to say, you know what, at least do this, and that could make you just a little bit better and move you on the right path?
Sure. And look, and we're big on call whoever you need to call.
Right.
We aren't saying don't call license. We're just saying be aware of what the limitations and restrictions are, but call somebody. I don't care if it's your pastor, your chaplain, a peer, license, who call somebody. And I'm happy to give you and your listeners my cell number. We give it out on our podcast all the time, and our 855 number. But first of all, if you're married, talk to your spouse, at least, because in the academies, we are still teaching the archaic principle of keep personal and professional separate. It's admirable, but the reality of the matter is this is what's causing a lot of the divorces. Talk to your spouse. They need to be your partner in this. They can help a lot of times if they're told, I just need you to listen, not fix it. That can be the beginning of them realizing it is safe to talk to somebody, and you can start getting some of the garbage out of the garbage can. The other big thing, our big tool that we give away is if you've got a particularly difficult event that keeps coming up in your head over and over and over again, or a supervisor driving you crazy, get a notebook, write a letter, and everybody gets their own notebook, but you write a letter to whoever it is that no one will ever read. People talk about they just want their day in court. They don't talk about the outcome of court. Well, this is that opportunity for their day in court. And I don't want it spell checked, and they have to handwrite it. But they write and write and write. Don't worry about spelling, punctuation. I don't even care if it's legible, because if you're really doing it right, you are thinking faster than you can write.
Right.
Scribble. And when you can't think of anything else to say, close the notebook. Something stirs again, go at it again. One day you'll look at the notebook and go, you know what? I'm done. And you burn it. Because if you think somebody, and this is a great way of getting garbage out of the garbage can. My children, when they were 4 and 7, their dad was DEA, were almost executed in a mall in Montgomery, Alabama, when they were 4 and 7. A contract on them for a year we knew nothing about.
Yeah.
I had to write those volumes of letters to this particular individual. And it was the only thing that kept me sane there for a while. But I had the right to think, feel, and express everything I did think, feel, and express. And you never erase or scratch out, and you never reread what you wrote, because that's picking the garbage back up. You're emptying your garbage on the paper. It's a form of what's called Gestalt therapy, that you talk to an empty chair. First responders aren't real fans of me putting a chair in front of them and going, okay, talk to that person. They're like, Susan, you've been doing this too long. There's something wrong with you. And this they can do on their own time. It's emotionally draining, and it can help them when they can't sleep. It's Chris Ferrara was murdered. He was my best friend. He was murdered in 2021 at the end of April. And I still write to him. I even write good stuff to him about, because he was a big part of the company. But it's just a great way of getting things out rather than stuffing it in or letting it build up like a pressure cooker. That's a great way to start getting garbage out. But they can call us 24/7. And our 855 number, we don't even have their phone number. This is how anonymous it is. And if they call 855-889-2348 and hit extension 1, it will get a stress coach. Let it ring, because it's rolling to the next available stress coach. and we have the number on our phone that they called, not their number.
Mm-hmm.
Families can call us if they have concerns, need some advice. They can reach out to me on my cell phone at 334-324-3570. They can text me. I say text during the day, call at night.
Mm-hmm.
But they don't ever have to tell me who they are. They can block their number, whatever they want to do. But they need to make sure they're reaching out to somebody that can provide the help that they need.
Awesome.
It's not a sign of weakness.
Mm-hmm.
These are good people that we have put in very difficult positions, and they just need to be able to have the safety of no judgment and no retribution on their job. And that's why we're here. I feel like this is a ministry that God has given to me. I work 7 days a week. I'm already scheduling people for the 4th of July. And they're like, it's the 4th. I go, yes, just another day in the week. And I'll wear red, white, and blue and go rah, rah as a Marine mom. But I don't work a day in my life because I love what I do.
Yeah. Yeah. And, she could definitely text her anytime because she's only going to get 4 or 5 hours of sleep anyway.
Hey, I can sleep when I'm dead. What are you talking about? And I just have a German Shepherd and a parrot. They don't care if the phone's going off at night.
Well, Susan, thank you for bringing up those numbers. For anybody that wants to do a little research before making that call, give us your website as well.
Undertheshield.com. And the Garbage Can has its own website also. And it is
Awesome.
called, yes, it's GarbageCanTheory.com. Don't put the in front of it. It's just GarbageCanTheory.com. And again, if you don't want to talk to me, you want to talk to one of our stress coaches who's a retired cop or a firefighter or dispatcher or EMT, whatever, I can get you hooked up with them. You're not going to hurt my feelings.
Yeah.
But please make sure that you reach out to someone. I promise you, and for your listeners that are familiar with Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman, Dave and I have been teaching together for over 30 years.
Awesome.
He supports this program. We're very good friends. And I tell him, I use you to give me credibility. And he says, use me. And so to those who are familiar with Dave, he's a huge fan of what we do. But please, whether it's us, somebody reach out, because there is help out there. And this is not about weakness or mental illness. It's about good people hurting and needing that help. And that's what we're here for.
Great way to put it. Susan, thank you for so much for taking some time. We want to get you off of this show just so you could be available to help more people. How does that sound?
Absolutely. And thank you so much for giving us this opportunity. And I want to say to the first responders out there too, thank you for what you do and the sacrifices you make. But more importantly, thank you to the families for the sacrifices that they make. I've been there, done that, and they just don't get to hear that enough. But we do appreciate all that they do.
Yeah, absolutely. We're here just right before the 4th of July, and there's a lot of families that because their loved one is going to be out there helping us stay safe out there, aren't going to have the picnic and all of those other things. So thank you to the first responders and all their families. Thank you again, Susan, for an awesome conversation, and thank all of you who have either watched or listen to this episode of Public Safety Talk Radio, and we'll be back with you next week with a wrap-up of Season 7.
Public Safety Talk Radio is produced by the POCUA. POCUA is a consortium of financial institutions serving law enforcement as well as other first responders and public safety professionals. To learn more about our association and to find one of our credit unions or service providers near you, go to www.policecreditunions.com. And always remember, if you aren't working with one of our POCUA credit unions, you're just banking with an institution that just so happens to serve first responders. As a public safety professional, you and your family deserve better. Find a POCUA credit union today.